Hi everyone. So in this video, we're going to be again looking at some of the post-design processes on Fusion 360. In this video, we're going to be concentrating on the animation environment, getting a nice little video together of how amazing your designs are. So let's open up Fusion and give it a go. So once we are in Fusion and we've opened up our design, what we need to do first is change our workspace. So to do this, click on the workspace drop-down menu in the top left. And today we're going to be using this animation workspace. So I'm just going to click on that one. And again, you'll notice that our sort of workspace and our interface changes ever so slightly. Again, we've still got a browser along the left just here with all of our components in and all those separate bodies. We've also got the tools that we use along this top bar here, but this time it's slightly differently along the bottom. So all of our navigation tools have suddenly disappeared, so the likes of orbit and pan are suddenly gone. And we've got this timeline at the bottom, which I'm just going to explain in a moment. But for now, I'm just going to focus on how you can still access using orbit and pan. So first of all, we've still got our view cube. So we can still use this and just click around and look at those different views. Also, if you left click and drag, we can then orbit and rotate this around a bit more freely. Just be a bit careful because sometimes it can just, like I'm showing, it can sometimes flicker about depending on how much of a surgeon you are with those steady hands when you're moving the mouse. Again, home button is still there if you want to just flick straight back to that. And just like before on the other workspace, if you use the little scroll button in the middle of your mouse, you can zoom in and out by rolling it back and forth. And if you press it in and drag, you can still access the pan tool. So that's just how we still change the orientation of our model. For now, I'm just going to hide our components at the side in the browser, just so we've got a bit more visibility. So now I'm just going to quickly talk about the animation timeline because understanding this will massively underpin how successful you are in this workspace. So essentially what it is whenever you generate actions or movements, anything that it is like that, it captures along this timeline. So along the top, you've just got your timeline in seconds or whatever it is that you've set it to. And you've also got this one just at the start, this sort of a red curtain. So if you imagine the theatre, if the curtains are closed, no one can see what you're doing. So if you left click in here, you can move this model however you like, and it will not capture those actions on your timeline. However, if you want to start capturing things, you need to be outside of the curtain. So you can do this just by either dragging it along, or you can just click and it will drop that sort of timestamp where it is. So I'm just going to start at about 1 second. So the first action that you can start trying to create is whenever I change my orientation, you'll notice that straight away it captures along the timeline. So anything in green is where you've actually got actions and it's going to start playing your video. It will also capture these. So on your left-hand side of the timeline, it will tell you what type of action it is. So because I've changed the camera angle and the orientation, this is a view switch up. So it captures along this row here. So if I just use these at the bottom here, I can then play, skip, and watch what I've just created. So I'm just going to click play and see how this looks. So pretty simple so far, but that's just a first example of the fact that it will capture everything that you do. So that capture that I've just done, I can also edit this. So I can left click on it. And while it's got this cursor symbol with the 4 arrows, I can drag this around so I can control when that actually occurs. And if you zoom into it using this toolbar along the bottom and just scroll that along, I can actually click on the edge of this when the cursor changes and drag this out. So I'm just going to make this last 2 seconds instead. And again, just click play. And it's just going to extend that camera change. It's just going to drag it out and make it just that little bit longer. So I'm just going to zoom back out again here on my timeline. So you'll also notice if I do a pan, it's also going to capture that as well, but within this same sort of camera action. So if I wanted to create a separate camera action, what I'd need to do is take this playhead and I'd need to just drag it along slightly. So I'm just going to leave about a second gap and I'm just going to pan this around. Not in really any particular way, sort of just wiggling about if anything, but it's just to give you an idea. So if I press play again, you'll see that it then captures those as separate actions. Again, I can move this along slightly differently and I can change how long it's going to take. If you decide that it's not quite right or you want to change it, you can just left click on it and press delete on your keyboard. So next, once you've got those views, there's something just to be aware of in terms of how frustrated your students might get. Because let's say for my next motion and action that I want to capture, I might want to show off what's on the back of the model. So for example, if I was to have a look at the back of the model, just to be a bit like, oh, what am I going to show next? You'll notice that it automatically captures. So if I press play, it's captured that already. So what you can do if I just delete this again is you can click this here. So this toggles whether it records your actions or not. So if I just left click on that, it'll come up telling me that it's not recording. So I can then look at the back of my model. I can say, right, this is where I've got my 2 decals. I'm happy to pan the camera around to that. So if I suddenly stop that recording, it's going to flick back to where it was because the action hasn't been captured. So again, that's just something to be aware of. You might not need to use it too much, but it's just a good one just for students getting frustrated. So the next one then is, at the minute, this model looks great and I could add a couple more actions like so, just to show off this model. But what it's not doing, which is quite good, is it's not showing those internal components. So I want to really show off the work that this student has done. So what you can get them to do is if you open up that browser again, you can see all these components as well as subcomponents like this one. I want to explode my model and make sure I can see all those. So again, I'm just going to leave a bit of a gap on the timeline. And anything for moving or manipulating components is found in this transform drop-down menu. So you've got things like manual explode where you can separate them yourself, a couple of different auto explodes, and you've also got transform, which is you imagine the move tool from the design workspace. It just allows you to move it along different axes and rotate it as well. So the one that I'm going to focus on, which is quite a useful one, is I'm going to choose auto explode all levels. So the difference between one level and all levels is if you do it on one level, it will explode your components, but any sub-components, they'll just remain as part of that parent component. Whereas exploding all levels will explode even those sub-components out. So I'm just going to select explode all levels. Again, students may panic when they see this message because what it's telling me is that there are no components available for exploding. Well, when I look at my browser on the left, I've got plenty of components there. What it's actually telling me is that I haven't selected any components. So if I just click OK, you can do this by either left clicking on individual components. Again, if you keep hold of Control or Shift on your keyboard, you can select multiple ones. But if you want to just quickly select all components, you can just click on Components at the top of your browser. So left click on Components, and again, I'm going to select Auto Explode all levels. Give it a few seconds just because there are quite a lot of components within this file. So there we go. It started to create this explosion. So I'm just going to zoom out a bit using that wheel on the mouse. So it's given me some options here for this explosion. The first one is either a one-step explosion or a sequential. So do we want all those components to move at once or one by one? What I'd generally recommend is if you've got a lot of components, I'd stay with one-step explosion. Otherwise, on sequential, you're sometimes waiting over 2 minutes for all those separate components to move. So I'm going to leave it as one step. The next one is also trail lines. So if I just toggle this on, you'll see that what it does is it shows the lines where components are moving from and where they originated from. I think that's just a really good bit of manufacturing information in terms of how this can be assembled. So I quite like to leave that on. And then the next one is our explosion scale. So do we want to blow this model to smithereens, or do we want it to just move ever so slightly? I'm just going to go about 3/4 of the way. And again, I'm going to zoom out just so I can see all of these separate components. And then you can either accept that explosion you've created or you can cancel it. I'm more than happy with that, so I am just going to select OK. So what it sometimes does with explosions, if you notice on the timeline, is it puts it right at the start. That isn't always what you'd want. So the way you can change this is if you left click on the top one and then scroll all the way down to the bottom, keep hold of Shift on your keyboard and then just left click on that bottom one. And then it should select all of those components along that way. Then you can just left click and drag that explosion out. So I'm just going to drop that just after all the other camera shifts. And I'm also going to expand this out just a bit, just to make sure it sort of, you can see where each component's moving to. So again, I'm just going to click play and see how that looks. So one of the things that you might notice is when it gets up to this explosion, because the camera angle is quite zoomed in, it's making it quite hard to see where all those components go to. So what I tend to do is click on the timeline and place that marker just at the start of that explosion. And then what I'll do is I'll zoom the camera out and pan the model up slightly or left or right, depending on where that explosion is moving towards. And then I'll just have a little play around with those camera shifts being in time with the explosion. So what I'll sometimes do, which I think looks really good, is to start it at the same time as that camera's zooming out, just to give you a good idea of that. Again, this workspace is sometimes a little bit trial and error, so don't be afraid if you can't get it right first time, you can just play around with it. So I'm quite happy with how this looks, but what I want to do is actually return those components back to where they originated from. So the way to do this is you can leave a little gap if you prefer, but then again, select the components that you've used in that explosion. And if you go to transform, you can select restore home. So send those piggies back home and all our components are now back where they originated from. Again, I'm just going to press play here and just see how that looks. So I am more than happy with that now. So what I can do is pause that. And along the bottom now, you'll see Storyboard. So imagine this a bit like separate pages within a technical drawing. So this is the first storyboard. And if you want to create a new one, you can simply click this little plus down at the bottom. So it'll ask you, do you want it to be a completely clean storyboard? Or would you like it to start where the other one leaves off? So you might have your model in a certain position and you want to show the next stage of an assembly. But for now, I'm just going to leave it as clean and click OK. So again, it started us off in this home position on our view cube. But what I'm going to do now is rather than exploding those models, I'm going to have a look at showing and hiding those models. So I'm just going to shift to the front of this design. And again, that camera angle has captured that, but I'm just going to leave a little gap once again. But now what I want to do is, rather than moving them all out, I want to show where those internal components are placed without having to take them out. So if I left click on this section here, it'll highlight where it is on my browser, which makes it a bit easier if you're dealing with a lot of components. So I now know that that is my lid section. So all I need to do is click the show hide button and it's going to hide those components. Then once you've hidden all the components that you need to hide, you'll notice that it does this on your timeline. So again, all of you actions are captured here. All actions that you do to do with components capture on the row for each component. So you'll notice that this light bulb appears on the timeline. That's showing me where a show or hide happens. And if you look at the yellow, imagine the light being switched on. So if the light bulb is on, it's yellow, it means we can see those components during the animation. Anywhere where it is grey after at the light bulb symbol, that means it's in the darkness, so it's not visible on our animation. So again, while those components are hidden, what I'm going to do is just pan around a little bit, show some of the inside of this design. And then what I'm going to do is, just to finish off with this one, I'm going to actually show these components once again. So all you do is the same procedure, show all those components. And then again, because these have reappeared now, everything is yellow afterwards. So I'm just going to give that a little see how it looks. So all I've done there is just shown and hidden some of those components at different stages. Again, quite a useful thing to do if there's certain aspects of a design you want to show off more than others. Just as another tip, if there's just a single component that you want to show off, rather than clicking through all these separate ones, what you can also do is you can right click on a component and select isolate, and it will hide every other component apart from that one. That's just a quicker way of doing that if there's only a couple of components you want to show. So now, once you're happy with your videos, we're going to move towards actually publishing these so we can add it to the coursework of the students. So to do this, you've probably guessed it, we're going to use this publish button here and we're going to select publish video. It's going to give me a option to either export all the storyboards that we've created on the bottom left here, or just the current one. So for this example, I'm just going to do the current one. It also gives me an idea of the resolution and the image size that it's going to capture. Obviously, if you've got loads of students all trying to save things into a certain area, you might want to choose the lower pixels just to save on that storage space. So I'm just going to leave it as it is and click OK. And then it's going to ask me for the file name. It's going to tell me what file type it's going to be. And a good option that's really good that will be covered in another video is that I can save this project to the cloud. So that just means it's stored on the Autodesk database and it can be accessed online, whether you're on Fusion or just a laptop or tablet. So it also gives you the option of where to save it, and make sure if you want it to be actually saved to your computer, make sure this is ticked as well. And then just click save. It's pretty quick, pretty fast, and we're all done. So the next skill that I'm going to show you is how to create a technical drawing based on an explosion or an animation that we've created. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to storyboard 1 with this explosion, and I'm going to go up to my timeline on where this explosion is in sort of further along that explosion scale. So in order to do this, I'm going to need to get rid of this restore home action at the end of this animation. So to do this a bit more efficiently, rather than just selecting on all of them, What I'm going to do is I'm going to left click and drop that playhead there. And I'm going to right click on the top restore home. And I'm going to select all after. And it's just going to select every single one of those. And then I'm just going to press delete. It's just a quicker, easier way of doing that. Going to make sure that this animation is saved. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change over to the drawing workspace. So to do that, click on the workspace drop-down menu, go to drawing and select from animation. Again, it's going to ask us about some of the parameters of our drawing. I'm just going to leave it as it is and click OK. Give it a few seconds just to load the wheel, get the hamster turning to keep the motor running. And it's going to give us this view to drop here. And as you can see, it's a lovely exploded view taken from the animation. We can set the style and the orientation that this is from. So I'm just going to leave it as home for now with a 1 to 5 scale. Click OK once you're happy with where you've placed it. And it'll just generate that drawing style and that drawing view on that page. So what I'm going to select now is, as I said before, I want to show off what some of these components are. So one of the best ways to do this is through the use of a parts list. So if you go to the tables drop-down menu in the top right and select parts list, I just like to drop it up and in the corner here. So again, it's going to automatically add these balloons just here. So it's actually labeling all those separate components. And if there's anything you need to change on this parts list, what you can do is when it highlights it gray, just double click and it's going to give you some options on what you want to include. So at the minute, this description column's empty. So it seems a bit pointless to keep that one in. So I'm just going to remove description and I'm going to add the mass in there instead. Also, you can actually structure this. So similar to what I was describing before, you can either do first level, or if you select all levels, it's going to show those subcomponents as well. I'm just going to leave this as first level just so it keeps it nice and tidy. Once you're happy with it, simply just click close. And we've got our parts list and our technical drawing generated from that animation. So hopefully you've learned a few things from the animation workspace from this video, and it's going to give you the skills to show off the coursework that the students are working on. So thank you for watching.